In this presentation, we will continue on our S Corporation Comprehensive Problem Part 3. We're going to have information data input. In other words, we're going to think about the information necessary in order to start the data input into the actual tax return, in which case we will be using tax software, that software being Lacerte by the owners of QuickBooks, which is Intuit. However, the minimum information you need to basically start the data input will be much the same no matter what type of data input you are using, and we also will be providing the actual tax form so you can think about the input into the tax forms as well. Here we are in Lacerte. Here's the software, and here is the form. We will be using the primary form will, of course, be the 1120S. The 1120S, we're going to be taking our data as we talked about in the prior presentation. The first step will typically be taking that information and entering it into some type of worksheet that you can then enter into the system, and that'll help you out to make any adjustments that are needed, including tax adjustments and adjusting entry type of adjustments. Now, if we take a look at our system here, note that if this was a continuing client, then we would take the software from the prior year, pro forma it forward, and that would help us to populate some of the data. This is going to be necessary because when you think about a corporation return, like an S corporation return, oftentimes you are going to be needing to enter some type of balance sheet information. That means you got to reconcile the retained earnings, unlike you might have to do for a Schedule C type business where you're basically just entering the income statement. So it's easier to do that if you can reconcile and roll forward from the prior year. And if you have any problems with the reconciling of the retained earnings, you may have to do some type of adjustment in order to get that reconciliation in place. That's something you can do with the Excel worksheet. Now, if it's a new client, then you're going to be taking, and if it's a new client that has been an S corporation for multiple years, then you want to get the prior year tax return, possibly enter that tax return into the prior year Lacerte software, and then roll it forward. That would be the best way to do it if possible, because then you can verify exactly the numbers to the tax return and then roll it forward. And then the software will help you out with things like the basis calculation and rolling over the retained earnings. If it's a new client that's starting in the current year, then of course we're going to need the minimal information to enter into the current year system. So we're just going to be entering into the current year system here, and they're going to be a tax return that has had multiple years. So we're not going to do the roll forward thing. We're going to enter this information directly into Lacerte in the current year, or the first year that we've done basically the return for this client. So we had our information, we took that information and then entered it into our worksheet. I think this is worthwhile to do because then you're converting it into a trial balance format, and then you can think about any adjustments you need, either book adjustments in terms of debits and credits, which is the way my mindset works, being, someone that comes from accounting instead of like a legal setting up. That balancing concept, double entry system is what I think in terms of typically. And you can also think of the tax adjustments as basically journal entries, which is what we will do. So I recommend putting it into this system and then using this to input into the trial balance, noting down any problems as you enter that information into the actual tax return. Now, what do you need to set up the actual tax return? If it's a new system that you're going to be putting in place in your tax software, then you're going to need the minimal information of the owner's names. Typically, you're going to need, and you probably want the address, but you don't need that just to start putting the numbers in. The minimal information you're going to need to enter the numbers is going to be the employer identification number, the name of the organization. This number will often be the thing that's going to, and the name will be allowing you to pay for the software. So if you're paying for the software, you're going to need this is like the social security number, so that it'll charge you for it. So you don't want to be changing those things later. Otherwise, you could result in incurring fees on that point. Now, to push forward with the actual data input on the numbers, you'll typically need the owners' names and the breakout, and these are going to be the shareholders of the organization, how they split those shares. So in this case, 70-30. That's the minimum information to basically get the tax return registered, up and running. And when you start to do the data input, this information here is going to be very important for you to be able to complete the data input process. You're going to need to know what those percentages are in order to basically complete the data input. Now, of course, the date formed is going to be necessary type of information that you're going to need to add to the tax return, but it's not required for you to just basically start entering the data or entering the numbers. It will be something that if this was a tax return that was started in the prior year, if they're an S corporation that wasn't started this year, but in a prior year, it should be in the system already or on the prior year tax return. So most of this data, hopefully we can get either from the prior year tax return in our system or from the prior year tax return that is provided to us. When we set up then the new client, so here's going to be our new client's data. I'm going to go back into the data input screen. We're going to say that we need the information. I'm just going to call it Corp 1, which isn't a very creative name for our practice problem, but I'm going to put it in. That's going to be it. Now, the number, this is going to be the EIN number. So I'm just going to put the 99s for the EIN number. This is something that you're going to need. This is like the social security number typically will be formatted in this type of fashion, 2 numbers and then a dash and so on. Then I'm going to enter the address down here. This probably isn't required just to get the return initially in place so you can start entering numbers in there, but this is going to be information that will, of course, be necessary to file the return. I'm going to say 248 South Doheny Drive. This is Beverly Hills. This is a house for sale in Beverly Hills, in case you're, looking into houses in Beverly Hills. And then we're going to have the fiscal year 12. We're going to have the date incorporated. I'm going to put 1/1/2016. Where incorporated, California. Date business began. I'm going to keep the same date. Now note that the typical process is that you are going to start a corporation, then you're going to have to make the election for the S corporation status. Typically, for most cases, you're going to want that election to start at the same date that you started the business for the S corporation. Otherwise, you're going to have some situation if it was a C corp first, where you could have some more complication with it. So you're going to have to make the S corporation election typically later, but hopefully you're going to have the election as of the inception of the corporation. That's what we're going to assume here. We're going to have the business code, which is going to be 448140. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the different types of business entities or different business codes, but just note that different types of codes could result in or apply to different types of tax consequences in some specific areas. So we're going to say this is going to be retail sales, clothing, and we're going to be using an accrual basis. So then if we go up to our forms up top, I'm going to go up to our forms, see what we have so far. So if we scroll back up, we're going to say the S election effective date. Here's the election effective date. The business activity code is here. We've got the name of the company as well as the address, the employer ID number, the date incorporated. And then we'll read through quickly some of the added information up top. And the G is the corporation electing an S corporation beginning with this year? So if this was the year of the election, you would want to put yes here. Check if it's the final return or an amended return, a name change, S election termination or revocation. Then I says enter the number of shareholders who were shareholders during any part of the tax year, and we'll get to shareholders shortly. J, check if corporation 1 aggregated activities for section 465 at risk purpose, 2 grouped activities for section 465 passive activity purposes. We're then going to go down to page 2, and this is going to be one of our major information type pages here. So we've got number 1, check if the accounting method. We're going to have the accrual method. See the instructions to enter. We're going to say the business activity. We're going to say it's retail sales in this practice problem, product or services clothing. 3, at any time during the year was the shareholder of the corporation a disregarded entity, a trust, an estate, or a nominee of similar person. We're going to say no because we have the 2 individuals. 4, at the end of the tax year, did the corporation own directly 20% or more, or own directly or indirectly 50% or more of the total stock issued or and outstanding of any foreign or domestic corporation? We're going to say no here. Number 5, at the end of the year, did the corporation have any outstanding shares of restricted stock? We're going to say no. At the end of the year, did the corporation have any outstanding stock options, warrants, or similar instruments? We're going to say no. Has this corporation filed or is it required to file Form 8918, Material Advisor Disclosure Statement, to provide information on any reportable transactions? No. Number 7, check this box if the corporation issued publicly offered debt instruments with original issue discounts. If checked, the corporation may have to file Form 8281. So we're not going to have that. We're going to say number 8, if the corporation A was a C corporation before it elected an S corporation, or the corporation acquired an asset with a basis determined by reference to the basis of the asset. So, in other words, were they a C corporation before an S corporation? We're going to say no here. That's going to complicate things greatly in that case. So, in a conversion process, you want to make sure to take a look at that. If you're a C corporation, you want to convert to an S corporation. Bit more confusing on that conversion process. Number 9, did the corporation have an election under 163J for any real property trade or business or any farming business in effecting during the tax year? We're going to say no. Number 10, does the corporation satisfy one or more of the following? See instructions. The corporation owns a pass-through entity with current or prior year carryover. We're going to say no. B, the corporation aggregate average annual gross receipts for 3 tax years preceding the current tax year are more than $26 million, and the corporation has business interest expense. We're going to say that's not a factor for us. Number C, the corporation is a tax shelter, and the corporation has business interest expense. So we're going to say no, not in this case. Number 11, does the corporation satisfy both the following conditions? The corporation's total receipts for the tax year were less than $250,000, and B, the corporation's total assets at the end of the tax year were less than $250,000. For us, that is the case. We're going to say yes. Continuing on to page 3, we have a little bit more of the information in Schedule B. During the year, did the corporation have any non-shareholder debt that was canceled, was forgiven, or had the terms modified so as to reduce the principal amount? We're going to say no. 13, during the tax year, was the qualified Subchapter S subsidiary election terminated or revoked? We're going to say no. 14, did the corporation make any payments in 2019 that would require it to file forms 1099? So in this case, it possibly could be the case. Oftentimes, you're probably going to say yes. And if that's the case, we're going to say, if yes, did the corporation file or will it file required forms 1099? So let's change this one from no to yes. So this is the default that we're going to change, the only default that we have changed thus far. So if requiring the forms 1099 on the current year, we're going to say yes. Now, what that means, of course, is if we're required, we are the corporation, and if we paid somebody else in terms of a contractor that wasn't a corporation, then the IRS wants us. They're going to say, hey, you're a corporation. Do you want the deduction? We're going to say, yes, we would like the deduction. They're going to say, well, then you need to tell us who you paid because we want to collect the taxes for them. If you get a deduction, we want to charge someone else the taxes. So therefore, that's a 1099, similar kind of to like a W-2, but it's not as much information. We just basically have to report and tell the IRS as well as the individual that we're going to tell the IRS, hey, we paid these people, and here's their social security number. You know, they should have this on their taxes. And then we're going to tell the people, hey, here's what we paid you so that you can put it on your taxes. And just to let you know that we told the IRS that too, so that we can get the deduction. And now we're going to say here that we have complied with that. We're going to say, yeah, we had some 1099 people that we had to issue a 1099 to, and we have indeed done so. Number 15 is the corporation attaching Form 8996 to certify as a qualified opportunity fund. We're going to say no. So that's going to be the major kind of information type section within the 1120S. The next thing we really need to kind of just get going is going to be the shareholder information. They're going to call it here the officer information. And I'm just going to put in the 2 officers. I'm going to say Tim Jones is going to be an officer. Social security number, I'm just going to put in the 9s once again. And the percentage of time devoted, I'm going to put the percentage of stock is what we need really to calculate this. Percentage of time will help us out if they're passive, to determine kind of whether they're passive or non-passive. And so we might, if this is basically their full-time business, we might say 100% of their work time goes here to Tim Jones and James Smith. In other words, we're going to say that these people work for the S corporation, and this is not passive to them, income to them. So then we're going to have that, and there's the 70-30 breakout. We're gonna need that information when we start to think about the net income that we enter that will then be broken out. We'll also need that information when we start thinking about the officer compensation that we're going to be breaking out between them, as well as distributions. So that's basically the bottom line kind of information we need to just start then entering the data into it. That's what we'll do next time. We'll actually look at the information we have on our Excel worksheet, and we will then enter that data into the tax return.